They told me only 2 people lived in that building. One of them had already been dead, and yet, every night, someone was walking above my ceiling. This happened on the outskirts of Berlin.
Until recently, I lived with my parents in a detached house in Bernau, not far from Berlin. They were always strict people with difficult personalities, which is why guests were almost never welcome in our home. The only friend of mine they managed to get along with, at least a little, was Lucas. I had known him since first grade, and he was probably the only person I could trust in a difficult situation. Unlike my parents, who found it easier to scold me for my mistakes than to teach me how not to make them, Lucas was always ready to help and give advice. He had much more life experience than I did. He grew up without a father, started working at 14, and still managed to go out with girls and enjoy life. Naturally, I envied him, but not in a bad way. I was genuinely happy for his success in all areas of life. The only thing he was unlucky with was his mother. She was an alcoholic. Half of her money she drank away, and with the other half she bought food for Lucas. Still, he had something I never had growing up: freedom.
A year after he turned 18, his mother passed away, and the apartment was left to Lucas. About a week ago, Lucas came over to visit me in the evening. My parents had gone to the theater, so the house was entirely ours for the next 3 hours. We weren't even thinking about throwing a party. We knew exactly how that could end in my parents' apartment. Despite my age, 19, my father was categorically against his son spending the night anywhere outside the house. That's why my friend's idea of buying a relatively cheap apartment on the outskirts of the city was received very positively by me. My parents didn't skimp on pocket money, and I knew how to save. I had been setting most of it aside for a long time. "I doubt I'll be able to buy a decent place," I said. "You will," Lucas smiled. "Not only decent, but new, in a new building." "That's funny," I said, my voice sounding discouraged. "I'm serious," Lucas said firmly. "I've already thought everything through. A neighbor of ours did the same thing a long time ago. He's living happily now. Your money will be enough for a small apartment in an old 5-story building on the outskirts. It was built back in the GDR era, when East Berlin was under Soviet control. The builders didn't level the foundation properly. Cracks formed along the walls, mold appeared, and the heating system failed. The building was declared unsafe and is being prepared for demolition. The residents will be relocated into new buildings." "So you're suggesting I live in a dump that could collapse on my head at any moment?" I asked irritably. "Oh, come on," Lucas cut me off. "You'll live there for less than a month. It won't collapse. But relocation is guaranteed. You get a free 2-room apartment in a new building. How's that for motivation?" I told him I'd think about it and give him my decision the next day. First, I needed to discuss everything with my parents and mentally prepare myself for the purchase if they agreed. The conversation was long. I gave countless arguments in favor of buying the apartment and explained Lucas's plans several times. After a considerable amount of time, my mother finally supported the idea, and my father followed, though more likely just so I'd finally leave them alone. I didn't care. I was happy. The next day, I went to see Lucas. He showed me an online listing he had found a few days earlier. The asking price was slightly lower than the amount I had saved. The seller turned out to be a reasonable young man, a bit older than us. The apartment had been inherited from his grandmother, whom he barely knew, so he felt no emotional attachment to it and put it up for sale almost immediately after receiving the inheritance. The apartment was on the 4th floor. The metal door stood out sharply against the peeling, scribbled walls, but what lay behind it wasn't any better. It smelled as if stray animals had spent their best years there. The wallpaper was peeling, and in some places, instead of a chandelier in the corridor, there was a single dimly glowing light bulb. The kitchen window was cracked in the lower corner. Luckily, it was summer, so surviving 2 weeks here didn't mean freezing to death. In the large room, there was a balcony, an old television, and a sofa, the one the grandmother had died on. We dismantled it immediately and covered it with a sheet. We weren't particularly superstitious, but we didn't want to sit where someone had once died. In the second room, there was a wardrobe, a bed, and a nightstand. "Well, it's livable," Lucas smiled. "Maybe I'll stay at your place?" I asked. "After all, the apartment is registered in my name, so I'll be relocated anyway." "There's a problem," Lucas hesitated. "I'm not living alone anymore. Remember Lisa from the parallel class?" Everything became clear. I would have to live here. At least the apartment had basic utilities, and the metal door reliably separated me from the outside world. Staying overnight at my parents' place didn't feel right, and I didn't want to see the expression on my father's face, the look of disappointment at his son's helplessness and unpreparedness for independent life. By evening, we moved my belongings from my parents' house. Lucas left to go home for dinner. I had nothing but tap water, so I decided to go to the shop. The building stood slightly apart from the others, so the walk to the shop took a fair amount of time. When I returned, it was already dark. The street lights were on, and near my entrance I noticed a silhouette. I hesitated, but decided to approach. "Who are you?" the silhouette asked in a woman's voice. "I live here," I replied, turning away from the entrance door. The silhouette put out a cigarette and came closer. It was a middle-aged woman, short, fairly well preserved for her age, but with a smoker's voice. "Monica," she said, extending her hand. "Sebastian," I replied. "How long have you been here, Sebastian?" "I moved in today." "I've lived here my whole life, and I'm not going anywhere," Monica said. "The officials think they can just throw us out. They promise new apartments, but we'll get a bed in a dormitory at best." She continued talking. "I'd rather stay here. Let that crack run straight through my apartment." "How many people live here?" I asked politely. "Just me and Herr Weber. He used to serve in the Navy. He got this apartment for long service. Later, his entire family died in a car accident. He's been alone ever since, living on the 5th floor." We talked for a few more minutes, until another silhouette appeared from the darkness of the courtyard. His posture was straight, his steps firm, but a limp and heavy breathing revealed an old man. "Meet Sebastian, Herr Weber," Monica nodded toward the silhouette. The man stepped into the light. He was elderly, with gray hair and a mustache. I extended my hand, but he didn't respond. His eyes were full of anxiety. He was clearly troubled by something. I didn't ask. "Don't open the door at night," the old man said sternly. "The door?" I asked. He didn't answer and hurried up the stairs. Monica and I exchanged glances. There were no answers, and after a while, we went our separate ways. I don't know why, but his request about doors unsettled me. That night, I locked the metal door completely and also locked the door to my room, securing it with a small latch. I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Thoughts raced through my head. The new place, the old man. Eventually, I told myself it was just dementia and calmed down. That night, I was woken by loud crashes from the apartment above me, as if something heavy was being dragged around. Then came heavy footsteps, more crashes, and finally the sound of something glass shattering on the floor. I got out of bed and knocked on the radiator with my watch strap. The noise stopped. The rest of the night passed quietly. In the morning, before heading to university, I met Monica near the entrance and politely asked about the apartment above mine. "That's Herr Weber's," she said with a smile. "Complete dementia. Final stage. He moves things around." I smiled back and went to class. The day passed as usual. After lectures, I stopped by Lucas's place, met Lisa, and stayed until evening. I returned home late. Under the streetlights near the entrance, a silhouette stood again. "How was your day, Monica?" I smiled. She didn't answer, just looked at me with a frightened expression. "Did something happen?" I asked. "Sebastian, I don't know." Her voice trembled. "I was just back from work. I was standing here smoking, and then I looked at my window. The light turned on, and then suddenly turned off. Do you think someone's there?" "Oh, come on," I smiled. "This building is older than both of us combined. It's the wiring. Want me to go in and check?" "If it's not too much trouble," she said, calming down a little, and handed me the keys. I cursed myself for that decision later, but it was too late to back out. I had a pepper spray with me, which gave me some confidence. The door to Monica's apartment was locked. With a trembling hand, I opened it and immediately turned on the light in the corridor. I checked the kitchen, then the living room, then the bedroom. Empty. I didn't want to go back downstairs, so I decided to call Monica from the window. She looked up happily and entered the building. She offered to have tea together, but I politely declined and went back to my room. About an hour passed. I was sitting at my laptop watching a series. The window was fully open, so I could hear everything happening outside. Voices of passers-by, distant cars. Suddenly, I heard a scream. A woman's scream. I jumped up and looked out the window. Nothing. Then another scream. This time I understood. It was coming from our building. Everything clicked in my head. My entire body started shaking, as if I had turned into a single block of ice for a moment. And then a warm, ringing terror gripped me. Only Monica could be screaming. Who could hurt her? A husband? But she was over 40 and single. An ex-husband? But if she didn't open the door, then... I froze. My eyes widened so much they felt like they might pop out of their sockets. My breathing stopped. I didn't check the bathroom. The stupor passed. I grabbed my phone and hid behind the curtain so I could see who exited the building and, if necessary, identify the criminal to the police. The dispatcher said a patrol was already on its way. The police car arrived in 10 minutes. No one came out of the building during that time. 3 officers ran inside, while 1 stayed outside. I waved to him and told him the apartment number so they could take my statement. There was a knock on my door. 2 detectives entered. They wrote down everything I told them and then invited me to Monica's apartment. She was lying in the bathtub, alive but badly injured. A trail of blood led from the bathroom to the kitchen window. She had probably tried to call for help or escape.
The cause of death wasn't established on the spot because there was none. There were no visible stab wounds. Blood had come from her mouth, and her fingernails were broken as if she had fought someone. According to the police, the door had been forced open, which meant the attacker had gained access to the apartment. The investigator believed the criminal escaped through the attic and exited through another door leading toward the forest on the opposite side of the building from my window. Spending the night alone was unbearable. I called Lucas and asked him to come over. He arrived reluctantly, but Lisa was staying at her place that night, so nothing held him back. I didn't tell the police about the demented old man upstairs. What was the point? They'd start questioning him, and he'd probably start moving furniture in front of them, I thought. The night passed as usual. Around 4 in the morning, I heard the familiar crashing sounds and a quiet, barely audible voice. Then again, the sound of glass hitting a wall and loud footsteps, as if the old man had started jumping in place. 5 minutes later, everything went quiet, and I fell asleep. In the morning, Lucas shared his impressions of the night. "You not only made me sleep on the floor so I couldn't fall asleep, but some idiot was stomping and jumping around in the middle of the night." "So you heard it too," I smiled. "That's my neighbor upstairs, a demented old man." "So you've got a crazy old man living above you, and you made me come here at night and climb those dark stairs? What if he's the one who attacked that woman?" I shuddered. Images flooded my mind. Him going downstairs, opening her door, hiding in the bathroom, waiting for a defenseless woman to come home alone and decide to take a shower after a hard day at work. "Enough," I said. "He can barely breathe. He's not capable of that." The day flew by. I only had 2 classes, so I returned home early. I went to Monica's apartment. Her brother had arrived. I met him on the landing and asked about her family. He said she never had one and never was lucky in life. He lived in another city and came only because of what happened to his sister. I spent the rest of the day at home watching series. I went to bed in a bad mood. That night, I was woken again by noise from above. This time, the jumping was stronger and more frequent, as if someone was trying to break through the floor with their feet. I barely managed to fall asleep. I woke very early. Lucas's words wouldn't leave my head. Could the old man really be capable of something like that? Eventually, I decided to call the police. The patrol arrived an hour later. They scolded me for not telling them about all the residents immediately, and even threatened me with legal consequences. When I told them about the old man and my suspicions, the investigator decided to question him right away. They told me to come with them. They knocked on the door for a long time. Herr Weber didn't open it. Then the investigator ordered the door to be broken down. It was wooden. Behind it was a neat apartment. Portraits of Herr Weber and his family hung on the walls. The old man himself was nowhere to be seen. The bedroom door was closed. The investigator knocked. Silence. Then he ordered that door to be broken as well. The last barrier fell from its hinges, and we entered the room. The pale, bald, thin body of Herr Weber was sitting in an armchair in front of a huge mirror. Around him lay his gray hair, either torn from his head or pulled out by himself, and shards of broken glass smeared with blood. His eyes were open. They were looking at the reflection of the door in the mirror. He was staring at us directly. The investigator called an ambulance. I stayed home that day and didn't go to university. I called Lucas, but he didn't answer. It felt lonely and terrifying. That night, I locked all the doors and windows and went to sleep with the light on. I barely managed to fall asleep. At dawn, I opened my eyes, stared at the ceiling and thought. Suddenly, crashes from above, jumping, fast running across the apartment. Morning jogging, I thought. The realization came seconds later. I jumped out of bed and called the police. Time dragged on. The noise stopped. I heard a police car pull up.
The apartment was searched. No one was there. I packed my laptop, money, and passport. An officer agreed to stay with me until I left. I dressed quickly. In my panic, I even forgot where I had put my phone, so I had to call it from the apartment's landline, a phone I had never used before. On the way, the investigator told me the autopsy results. Herr Weber had been dead for at least 3 days, which meant he was killed on the very day he warned us about the doors. I stayed at Lucas's place until evening. When he returned from university, we decided to take 3 friends with us and retrieve the rest of my belongings from the apartment. The streetlights were turning on as we approached the building. That was a mistake, going there in the evening. As we neared the building, I glanced at my windows. The light turned on for a moment, then went out. I nearly fainted. I don't remember how we got home. I only remember screaming at everyone to get away from that building. I live with Lucas now, waiting for the building to be demolished. Recently, I discovered missed calls from the apartment's landline number. I threw the SIM card away, along with the phone.
It was not my problem anymore.